Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? You guys sent in this research paper about the Netflix show Supacell, and wow, there are some pretty wild claims in here.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It really is. We're talking about religion and hip-hop and even accusations of Satanism, so buckle up.
Definitely going to be interesting to unpack all of this.
All right, so first off, this source. It's an academic paper with a really long title. Supacell Season 2, They Not Like Us, Dajjal System. Netflix, Supacell, Jay-Z, P. Diddy, Black Excellence, Anti-Allah Satanism by Rapman, Rock Nation, Clarence 13X, and the Imaging Nation World of the Satanic Jinn, Crypto, Bitcoin, NFT, Den, Brock, Pierce, Bieber, BAYC, Nazis. It's by Aston Walker from Birmingham City University.
Wow, that's a title.
Right. And just to give some quick context for those who haven't seen it, Supacell is this British superhero show. The creator, Rapman, he's signed to Jay-Z's label Rock Nation, and the paper claims that the final episode has this
Oh, okay.
horrific satanic stabbing scene with
Right.
like super bad special effects. The author is really concerned that the show is promoting Satanism, especially since it's targeted at teenagers.
Yeah, I can see how that would be concerning to some people. That connection between Supacell and Jay-Z through Rapman is one of the main threads the paper follows. Then it goes on to connect Jay-Z and P. Diddy to the Five Percenters, a group that comes from Islam but has some pretty different beliefs.
Okay, wait, I'm not that familiar with the Five Percenters. Can you give a quick overview?
Sure, the Five Percenters basically came out of the Nation of Islam back in the 60s, but they have their own unique doctrines. Like, they believe that black men are divine. It's an idea you actually see a lot in hip-hop lyrics.
Oh, interesting. So how does this all tie back to the paper's argument?
Well, the paper is arguing that Jay-Z and P. Diddy are using what they call a satanic version of Five Percenter ideology to control black creative culture. It even brings up Jay-Z's film, The Book of Clarence, saying it connects to Clarence 13X, the guy who started the Five Percenters.
Whoa, okay. So we've got Supacell, Jay-Z, P. Diddy, the Five Percenters. And then on top of that, the paper brings in all these historical figures from Islam, like Ali, Abu Bakr, Umar, Aisha, and Hafsa.
Yeah, this is where things get even more complicated.
All right, so can you help break down how these historical figures fit into the whole argument?
The paper argues that the Prophet Muhammad's family, especially Ali, was superior. It condemns figures like Abu Bakr and Aisha, saying they're responsible for bloodshed and oppression. It uses some really strong language.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the author is making some strong claims. It's important to remember that we're just exploring the content of this paper, not endorsing any particular religious viewpoint or anything.
Absolutely. We're just diving into the content and seeing what the author is arguing, not taking sides in theological debates.
Right. This is about understanding what the paper is saying, not about judging anyone's beliefs. But it really is fascinating how the paper tries to connect all of these different things. Supacell, hip-hop, historical figures in Islam, and accusations of Satanism.
It is, isn't it? It's a very elaborate web that the author's trying to weave here.
So can you help me understand a bit more about how the author is making those connections? How do they get from historical figures in Islam to hip-hop today?
Okay, so to understand the author's take on Ali and figures like Abu Bakr and Aisha, we have to go way back to the early days of Islam, right after the Prophet Muhammad died. So after the Prophet Muhammad passed away, there was this whole issue of who would take over. Some people believe leadership should stay within his family, specifically with Ali, who was his cousin and son-in-law.
Right, okay.
But other people supported figures like Abu Bakr, one of the Prophet's close companions. This disagreement is actually what caused divisions in the early Muslim community.
So that's where those historical figures the paper mentions come into play.
Exactly. The author is very much on Ali's side and sees Abu Bakr, Umar, and Aisha as basically hijacking the leadership and straying from the true path of Islam. And the language they use to condemn these figures is really harsh. They accuse them of everything from heresy to being behind violence and stuff.
Wow, that's pretty intense. This must be a really sensitive subject for a lot of Muslims.
Oh, absolutely. It's important to remember that these historical events and figures are still debated within Islam. Different branches have different views on these early leaders. So saying that one interpretation is the absolute truth, well, that's definitely a problem.
Okay, so the author is taking this very specific interpretation of early Islamic history and using it to build their argument.
Yeah, it seems that way. They're basically creating this narrative where Abu Bakr and Aisha represent a corruption of the true Islam. And then they're tracing this corruption through history and connecting it all the way to hip-hop today.
Okay, but how are they bridging that massive gap? How do they go from early Islamic history to Jay-Z and P. Diddy?
That's where the Five Percenters fit in. Remember, they came out of the Nation of Islam, which drew inspiration from various sources, including Islam. The author's argument seems to be that the Five Percenters' beliefs are like a continuation of this corrupted form of Islam they trace back to figures like Abu Bakr.
I see. And since Jay-Z and P. Diddy have said things that align with 5%er thought, the author is linking them to this whole historical narrative.
Exactly. It's almost like a chain reaction where one event or figure leads directly to the next, ultimately culminating in what the author sees as a satanic influence on hip-hop culture.
It kind of sounds like a conspiracy theory in a way.
Well, it's definitely a unique interpretation of history and culture, to say the least, and it makes you wonder about the author's motivations and how they're viewing all of this.
You know, one thing that really stands out to me is the language in this paper. It's very strong, almost inflammatory at times.
Yeah.
Do you think that affects how believable the argument is? Does it make it harder to take the author seriously?
Yeah, that's a good point. Using such charged language definitely impacts how the argument comes across. It can feel less objective and more like it's driven by personal bias or an agenda.
And to be honest, the author only focuses on that one scene in Supacell, the horrific, satanic stabbing scene. Feels a bit like they're cherry picking. Without any other context, it's hard to tell if that one scene really reflects what the show is actually about.
I agree. It would be more helpful if they analyzed the whole show instead of taking one scene out of context.
It almost feels like the author already had this narrative in their head, and they're trying to squeeze Supacell into it, instead of looking at the show with an open mind.
I think that's a valid observation. It raises questions about whether the author is truly being critical or just looking for things that confirm what they already believe.
Right. And it really emphasizes how important it is to be critical of the sources we read, especially when they talk about sensitive topics. We need to think about the author's perspective, any potential biases they might have, and whether they're oversimplifying things.
Absolutely. And in this case, the author is dealing with religious beliefs, historical events that people still debate, and the nuances of a creative work like Supacell. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But even though this paper presents a very specific and potentially controversial viewpoint, it does make you think about things like cultural influence and the power of media.
It definitely does. Even if we don't agree with the author's conclusions, the paper makes us think about how cultural trends start, who influences them, and how media can be used to push certain ideologies. It encourages us to be more aware of the messages we're exposed to, whether we realize it or not.
So maybe the takeaway here isn't about agreeing or disagreeing with the author, but using this paper as a starting point for a bigger conversation about these issues.
I think that's a great way to approach it. The paper, even with its provocative claims, can be a good tool for getting people to think critically and talk about cultural influence, religious interpretation, and the power of media.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I'm sure they are. This is one of those deep dives that sticks with you long after the episode is over.
Okay, so we've talked about the author's historical and theological arguments, their language, and how they connect all these seemingly unrelated elements. But there's one piece we haven't really discussed yet, those accusations of Satanism. What exactly does the author mean by that, and how does it tie into everything else they're saying?
That's a really important question, and it's one that we need to be careful about. The word Satanism carries a lot of weight, both historically and culturally.
Right, it brings to mind images of devil worship, occult rituals, all that dark, scary stuff.
Exactly. And it seems like the author is using the term very broadly, connecting it to ideas of corruption, deception, and pushing harmful ideologies. It's not about literal devil worship.
So it's more like a symbol for what they see as negative forces at work.
That seems to be the case. And they're linking this idea of Satanism to the figures they condemn from early Islam, the Five Percenters, and ultimately to Jay-Z, P. Diddy, and Supacell. They're saying there's this spiritual lineage connecting all of these things.
That's a pretty provocative claim. But before we get into how the author backs up this idea of satanic influence, I think it's important to acknowledge how sensitive this topic is and to be respectful.
I completely agree. We need to remember that everyone has their own beliefs, and using a term like Satanism can be offensive or upsetting to some people. We're here to analyze what the paper says, not to judge anyone's beliefs.
Right, it's about understanding the argument, not judging people. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at how the author connects this idea of Satanism to specific examples in Supacell, Jay-Z's work, and the broader hip-hop scene. All right, so we've been talking about this paper and its pretty intense accusations of satanic influence in hip-hop. But I'm still not totally clear on what the author even means by Satanism in this context.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky part of the paper. It's clear they're not talking about, like, literal devil worship or anything like that.
Yeah.
Instead, they seem to be using Satanism more as a general term for anything they see as corrupting or harmful. It's like forces they see as going against what they consider to be the true path, going all the way back to those early Islamic figures.
Okay, so how does that connect to Supacell and hip-hop specifically?
Well, the paper dives into specific lyrics from Jay-Z and scenes from Supacell and interprets them through this lens of satanic influence. For instance, they point out certain symbols and imagery that they say align with 5%er ideology, which, remember, they see as a corrupted form of Islam.
You know, as someone who actually enjoys hip-hop, it kind of feels like the author is stretching things to fit their narrative. Like they're trying too hard to make these creative works fit their theory.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And it really highlights how subjective interpretation can be, especially when we're talking about art and symbolism.
Definitely.
What the author sees as proof of satanic influence, someone else might see as social commentary or just artistic expression.
Or even just entertainment, right?
Exactly. It's a good reminder that we all have our own biases and perspectives that shape how we see the world.
For sure. And that there's rarely one single right way to interpret something.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to complex topics like religion and culture, it's important to be open to different perspectives.
Okay, so putting aside the author's specific accusations, what can we actually learn from this paper, even if we don't buy into everything they're saying?
Well, I think it brings up some really important questions about cultural influence and how powerful media can be.
Right.
It encourages us to be more critical of the music we listen to, the shows we watch, the messages we encounter every day.
Yeah. It's not about like boycotting hip-hop or Supacell. It's more about engaging with these things thoughtfully, asking questions, and being aware of the different ways they can be interpreted.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's all about awareness and critical thinking.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that everything we see and hear, every song, every TV show, comes from a specific point of view. And it's our job to engage with those perspectives actively, to question things, to analyze them, and to ultimately form our own opinions. It's not about blindly accepting what we're told.
Absolutely. We shouldn't just be passive consumers of information, right? We need to be part of the conversation, even when, or maybe especially when, it's a challenging one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's through that kind of thoughtful engagement and critical thinking that we really grow and learn.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.
And remember, everyone, keep those brains buzzing.
All right, so get this. Today's deep dive is going to be a bit of a wild one. We're going to be exploring some, well, surprising connections, you could say, between a controversial historical figure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Lord Curzon.
Okay.
And the modern world of hip-hop. And get this, there's accusations of hypocrisy, Satanism, and even something called the Dajjal system.
Wow, that's quite the mix.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it, how these threads all intertwine? You've got colonialism, ideology, pop culture.
Yeah.
It really underscores how the echoes of the past, can reverberate in the present in ways we might not expect.
Yeah, it's like a historical puzzle with pieces scattered across centuries.
Yeah.
And to guide us through this maze, we're diving into, well, it's a paper with quite a title.
Right. It's called Rename the BCU Steamhouse Curzon Building, Curzon Library, and HS2 Curzon Street Station Artwork and Banner, Lord Curzon and Satanist Aleister Crowley, and the Balfour Declaration. 120 years later, proof of macro-retrocausality and origins of Hamas-Israel invasion and Sunni Muslim Nazism, QED.
That's a mouthful.
I know, right?
Catchy, though. I like it.
Yeah.
And the author, Aston Walker, they actually have a personal connection to this topic. They're associated with Birmingham City University, which, as you can probably tell from the title, has several buildings named after this, Lord Curzon.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Who exactly was Lord Curzon, and why is his name on a university building causing such a stir?
Well, Lord Curzon was a very prominent figure in British politics in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Okay.
He served as Viceroy of India.
Got it.
And was a staunch advocate for British imperialism.
Okay.
His views on colonialism were, to put it mildly, a product of his time.
The paper actually quotes him directly. He said, "The theory of empire is based on the supremacy of the white man over the black."
Wow, that's a That's a pretty blatant statement of white supremacy.
Yeah,
No wonder people are questioning why buildings are still named after him in this day and age.
exactly. The arguments against honoring Curzon, they center on the ethical implications of celebrating someone with such explicitly racist views, especially within a diverse and modern academic institution.
Makes sense. Now, there's another intriguing twist to this story.
Oh,
A potential connection between Lord Curzon and the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley.
oh, right.
What's the story there?
This is where it's really interesting. Crowley, he's often dubbed, the wickedest man in the world.
Yeah.
He was a controversial figure known for his involvement in ceremonial magic and esoteric practices.
Right?
The paper alleges some sort of association between Curzon and Crowley, even referring to Crowley as a Satanist.
Okay, hold on. Is there any actual evidence to support this claim?
Well, the paper does provide some links to sources, but
Yeah.
the specific nature of their alleged connection, it isn't, explicitly laid out.
Mhm.
It's definitely an area that warrants further investigation.
It definitely piques the curiosity.
Yeah.
So we have Lord Curzon, a controversial historical figure, with views that clash with modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect to the world of hip-hop?
This is where the author's arguments take a fascinating, albeit, speculative turn.
Right.
They propose that the legacy of British colonialism, which Curzon so championed,
Yeah.
has had profound and far-reaching consequences, shaping global power dynamics
That's it.
and even influencing modern cultural movements like hip-hop.
Wait, are they saying colonialism directly caused hip-hop? That seems like a stretch.
Not directly, no. They introduced this concept called macro-retrocausality, which suggests that actions in the past can have ripple effects that influence seemingly unrelated events in the future.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does hip-hop fit into this macro-retrocausality idea?
Well, the author brings in the work of Rapman, specifically his Netflix series Supacell,
Okay, yeah.
which features a cast of Black superheroes.
Yeah.
The show has been, praised for its representation and exploration of themes like power and identity.
Supacell definitely made waves with its fresh take on the superhero genre.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see where this is going.
Well, the author then makes this bold claim,
Yes.
linking Supacell to this broader narrative of colonialism and its impact on Black identity. They argue that the show, while seemingly progressive on the surface,
Right.
promotes ideologies that they believe are harmful.
That's a pretty provocative statement. What ideologies are they referring to?
They specifically point to the Five Percenters, a Black nationalist movement
Okay.
that emerged in the 1960s with beliefs that deviate from mainstream Islam.
Hmm.
The author suggests that Supacell, along with figures like Jay-Z and Diddy,
Oh, wow.
are promoting these Five Percenter ideologies.
This is where things start to get a bit murky for me. Can you explain a bit more about the Five Percenters?
Yeah.
And why the author sees their influence as problematic?
Well, they're a fascinating group with a complex history. Their ideology, which emphasizes, Black empowerment and self-reliance,
Yeah.
also includes beliefs about racial superiority and a unique interpretation of Islam.
So the author is drawing a line from colonialism to this Black nationalist movement,
Yeah.
suggesting that its presence in hip-hop culture is somehow a negative consequence of that historical legacy.
Yes, and to understand that line of thinking, we need to delve into another concept the author introduces. It's called empires of the mind.
Empires of the mind.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we were just about to explore this concept of empires of the mind.
Yeah. I'm really curious to hear more about that. It seems pretty central to understanding the author's overall argument.
Absolutely. The author, they use empires of the mind to describe how ideologies and cultural influences can wield just as much power as physical empires, shaping beliefs and behaviors across generations.
So it's like a subtle form of control that continues long after the physical empires have crumbled.
Exactly. And the author, they argue that this is precisely what's happening with hip-hop culture. They believe that figures like Jay-Z and Diddy are perpetuating these empires of the mind through their promotion of Five Percenter ideology, which they see as deviant and harmful.
Hold on, I'm trying to follow the thread here. How does the author connect British colonialism, the Five Percenters, and hip-hop to this Dajjal system they keep mentioning?
Yeah.
It seems like a huge leap.
It is a complex argument. Essentially, they trace a line from the British Empire's influence in the Middle East to the rise of Saudi Arabia and the spread of Wahhabism, which is a very strict interpretation of Islam.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how does Wahhabism fit into this puzzle?
The author sees Wahhabism as a key component of this Dajjal system, which they describe as a global network of control and oppression. They argue that Wahhabism's very rigid doctrines and its rejection of certain Islamic traditions have contributed to intolerance and extremism.
Okay, that's a pretty bold claim. But
Yeah.
how do they connect the dots from Wahhabism to Jay-Z and hip hop?
They point to the five percenters who have a unique interpretation of Islam that diverges from both mainstream Sunni and Shia Islam. They believe that the five percenters ideology, with its emphasis on black superiority, aligns with the author's understanding of the Dajjal system. And because they see figures like Jay-Z and Diddy as promoting five percenter ideas through their music and influence, they lump them into the system as well.
So they're saying that hip hop, through its association with the five percenters, is unknowingly promoting this Dashel system and its alleged agenda of oppression.
That seems to be their argument. Yeah, it's certainly a provocative and complex web of connections they're weaving.
It definitely is. But even if we entertain this idea of the Dashel system, how do celebrities like Justin Bieber and the Bored Ape Yacht Club fit in? That seems like an even bigger stretch.
That's where the author's argument takes an even more speculative turn. They point to these figures' involvement in the world of cryptocurrency and NFTs as evidence that they're part of this interconnected system of control. They specifically mention Brock Pierce, who is a very prominent figure in the crypto world as someone who embodies this Dajjal system, and they link him to figures like Diddy and Justin Bieber, suggesting that they're all part of this network.
Okay, I'm trying to keep an open mind, but connecting Justin Bieber and Bored Apes to an ancient Islamic concept like the Dajjal feels a bit far-fetched, doesn't it?
It's definitely pushing the boundaries of conventional thinking. But remember, the author is trying to highlight what they see as a hidden network of influence that operates beneath the surface of popular culture and technology.
That's a lot to unpack. So with all these intricate connections and bold claims, what does the author propose we do about it? What are their solutions for addressing the Dajjal system they see at play? So we've been exploring some really intricate and frankly mind-boggling connections between history, ideology, and pop culture.
Yeah.
But where does it all lead? What does the author suggest we do with this information?
Well, amidst all the complex theories and provocative claims, there are two concrete calls to action. The first is to rename the university buildings named after Lord Curzon.
That seems like a pretty logical starting point. After all, we've seen how his views on colonialism and white supremacy clash with modern values.
Exactly. It's a symbolic act that acknowledges the harm caused by colonialism and signals a commitment to a more inclusive future.
Right.
The second call to action focuses on engaging with the youth of Birmingham.
Education and dialogue, a powerful combination.
Yeah.
But how does the author envision this engagement playing out?
They believe in the power of education to raise awareness about these complex issues and empower young people to think critically about the messages they encounter in the world around them. They see it as a way to break free from these empires of the mind,
Right.
and create a more just and equitable society.
So it's about equipping younger generations with the tools to question assumptions, challenge dominant narratives, and ultimately shape a better future.
Right.
But how does this tie into the more speculative aspects of the paper, like the Dajjal system and the allegations about figures like Jay-Z and Diddy?
The author doesn't offer specific solutions for addressing those concerns directly.
Okay.
However, their emphasis on critical thinking and media literacy
Right.
can be seen as a way to counter what they perceive as negative influences within pop culture and technology.
It's like they're saying, don't just passively consume what you're given. Question it, analyze it, and form your own conclusion.
Precisely, and that applies to everything from historical narratives to modern cultural trends.
Yeah.
We need to develop the skills to discern fact from fiction, identify bias, and recognize attempts to manipulate or control our thoughts and beliefs.
This whole deep dive has been a wild ride.
It has.
We've gone from a seemingly straightforward debate about a university building to exploring the legacy of colonialism, the complexities of Black nationalist movements, the rise of cryptocurrency, and even delved into ancient Islamic concepts.
It's been quite a journey, and while some of the authors' claims might seem far-fetched or even controversial, they do raise important questions about the interconnectedness of our world, and the ways in which the past continues to shape our present.
It's definitely a lot to process, but I think that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It challenges us to think outside the box, question our assumptions, and engage with different perspectives, even if we don't always agree with them.
Absolutely. It's about expanding our understanding, broadening our horizons, and sparking meaningful conversations about the forces that shape our world.
Well said.
Huh.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up this fascinating exploration?
Just this. The author's passion for truth, their desire to expose what they see as hidden systems of control is admirable.
Yeah.
Whether we fully embrace their conclusions or not, their work serves as a reminder to be vigilant, to think critically, and to never stop questioning the narratives we're presented with.
Couldn't agree more. To our listeners, we encourage you to continue the conversation, delve into the source material, share your thoughts, and let's keep the dialogue going. Remember, the journey of discovery doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.